Welcome back to Domain 4 of the Security Plus Exam Cram Series 2024 edition. And here in Section 4.8, our focus will be incident response. We'll begin with a look at the 7 phases of the incident response process before we delve into a few related topics like training and testing and threat hunting. Before we wrap with a topic I think you'll find fascinating, digital forensics and evidence collection. Some of the most interesting concept of the entire series. Really excited to get into it with you. Let's get started. Welcome back to Domain 4. We're all the way up to Section 4.8, where we're focused on incident response. More specifically, the syllabus asks us to explain incident response activities, and I'm going to give you a clearer, more detailed, more concise explanation than you will even get from the official study guide here. This is a short session, but it's going to be very revealing in terms of what it teaches you around incident response for exam day. So when we look at the syllabus, we have process, from preparation to lessons learned, 7 steps there. Training, testing, root cause analysis, threat hunting, and digital forensics. Digital forensics and evidence handling, butts up against the law. I find that to be a fascinating topic. But the key topic here, if we were to pick a most important, is right here. The 7 phases of incident response. Maybe you recognize that, maybe you didn't, but the fact that it just says process, it's a bit under the covers there. So we're going to start right there with incident response and those 7 phases. So we have preparation, detection, analysis, containment, eradication, recovery, and lessons learned. And that represents the 7 phases of incident response. So let's park that over here. We've got our 7 steps, or phases. We're going to talk through key activities at each phase, and I'm going to break down some terminology for you so you understand it well for the exam. The preparation phase. This is where incident response plans are written, configurations are documented, the team is formed, we are preparing. Detection. This is where we're monitoring events. We're using tools like SIM, SOAR, XDR, IDS and IPS, and anything that's UBA, User Entity Behavior Analysis enabled, to identify potential threats. Analysis. We're analyzing detected events to verify if the events identify an actual incident. Answering that question, is it really an incident? In phase 4, containment, we are limiting the damage. We're reducing the scope of the incident declared in the analysis phase. Key point there, it's really in analysis that we declare, yes, this is an incident. And then eradication, once the affected systems are identified, we have coordinated isolation or shutdown, rebuild, and the notifications around that to make sure we do it in the most non-disruptive way possible. Then in recovery, root cause is addressed, and it's time to return to normal operations. We are returning the environment to its normal state. And lessons learned is exactly what it sounds like. We're going to review what we've just gone through in this incident response to identify the root cause. We're going to go through a root cause analysis so we can prevent this from happening again in the future. It might cause us to change documentation. It might cause us to provide some training to some people. We might change some tooling. We might go get some new tooling. We might change the way our tooling works together to close that control gap, whatever it was. Now we're going to go through some key terminology you should be familiar with. Where we have our first term I think you need to be familiar with. And here a key activity is triage. It's the initial assessment and prioritization of an incident. It's determining the severity and scope of the incident. Assessing whether or not it is an actual incident. Moving on to containment, where we're limiting the damage of the incident. We have a couple of key terms here. The first is containment, which attempts to limit and control the incident from spreading. So for example, disconnecting infected hosts from the network. And mitigation. These are the steps taken to reduce the severity of the incident, where the organization begins to take actions necessary to fix the incident. And moving on to the eradication phase, you should know the meaning of eradication, which involves removing artifacts of the incident, like the malware, backdoors, or other elements that led to our problem. So for example, completely wiping and reinstalling compromised systems. Cleanup of a fashion. And then in the recovery phase, we have recovery, which is restoring affected systems and services back to normal operations. And that's the key phrase, back to normal. So addressing the root causes of the incident. For example, restoring data from backups and bringing production systems back online. Returning the environment back to its previous normal state. So that's the incident response process. Let's move on to training. An incident response team is composed of employees with expertise in different areas, and together they have the knowledge and skills to respond to an incident, which often come through extensive training. Those skills don't come for free. Training includes concepts such as how to identify and validate an incident, to triage, communicate, and contain the incident, to collect and protect evidence, and to recover from an incident. So investigators also learn how to become better prepared by retrospectively analyzing the incident and reporting on the findings. Lessons learned, that root cause analysis we talked about in the incident response process. Next, we have testing. These are types of incident response exercises. And there are two major types of tests you should be familiar with for the exam. The first is the tabletop exercise, where you distribute copies of the incident response plans to members of the incident response team for their review. And then the team walks through the plan in the context of a specific incident, often known only to the person who's coordinating the tabletop exercise before they reveal it at the session. And the team will walk through the incident looking at their plan and provide feedback about any updates needed to keep the plan current. But that tabletop exercise is paper-based, it's hypothetical. And the other is the simulation, which is similar to the tabletop exercise, except some of the response measures are then tested on non-critical functions. So this one involves some form of doing. Next, we have root cause analysis. This is the process that focuses on identifying the underlying cause for an issue or a compromise. It aims to identify how to fix the underlying problems that allowed the event or incident to occur in the first place. It ensures that any systemic issues that led to the problem are also addressed. Findings will be captured in a report for stakeholders and should include actionable recommendations. The goal is to learn from the incident and prevent future recurrence of a similar incident. Next, we have threat hunting. This is a process of proactively and regularly seeking out cybersecurity threats inside your network from attackers and malware threats, as though your environment has already been compromised. So there's some external input that can be very helpful to threat hunters, and that is threat intelligence. So there's intelligence fusion. These fusion centers in the US and abroad play an important role in countering cyber threats and attacks by gathering, analyzing, aggregating, and sharing threat information. And that threat information can include a variety of indicators of compromise and information about bad actors, and it comes from a variety of sources. The intelligence fusion involves both industry and government collaborating in that gathering, analyzing, aggregating, and sharing. And threat hunters will often leverage threat feeds, which enable organizations to stay informed about indicators of compromise. These threat intelligence feeds show us indicators of compromise related to various threats that could adversely affect the network. Our threat hunters operate under the presumption of compromise. This proactive exercise assumes that we have already been compromised and we're out there looking for malicious activity. And threat intelligence feeds often integrate directly with our security tools. Our tools will often consume the data from those threat intelligence feeds and enrich the visibility we have in our search. For example, if the threat intelligence feed tells our tooling that a particular endpoint is known malicious, the tooling can light that endpoint up as red in some visual dashboard or other interface. So with those threat intelligence feeds, our tooling can be updated in near real time with information about emerging threats. And we want our team to consume advisories and bulletins which provide good advice on how to keep the company safe. Advisories tend to be released by government-funded agencies. Bulletins tend to be released by vendors or private companies. And that brings us to digital forensics. Two important concepts you need to know for exam day here include legal hold, which protects any documents that can be used in evidence from being altered or destroyed. Legal hold is sometimes called a litigation hold, as litigation refers to legal action. Another important term is chain of custody, which tracks the movement of evidence through its collection, safeguarding, and analysis life cycle. The chain of custody documents each person who handled the evidence, the date and time it was collected or transferred, and the purpose for the transfer. It confirms appropriate collection, storage, and handling throughout its life, from the moment it was collected until the moment it is shown in court. And under U.S. law, if you can't show that demonstrable chain of custody, if that chain is broken anywhere along the way, the evidence is typically going to be thrown out. So let's talk about what it takes for evidence to be admissible in a court of law. So to be admissible, evidence must be relevant to a fact at issue in the case. It has to make that fact either more or less probable than without the evidence, depending on which direction you're trying to prove. The fact must be material to the case, so the evidence needs to be important in proving the case. It must be competent or legally collected, so competent means reliable here. But again, obtained by legal means. And to prevail in court, evidence must be sufficient, which means convincing without question, leaving no doubt. The accuser is trying to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. The defendant or the accused is trying to inject doubt or demonstrate that there is in fact doubt. So what is the importance of collecting evidence? Because as soon as you discover an incident, you have to begin to collect evidence and as much information about the incident as possible. Evidence can be used in a subsequent legal action or in finding the attacker's identity. The evidence can also assist you in determining the extent of damage. So let's talk about where we can find evidence when we're thinking about a security breach. So certainly on a hard drive, was the storage media itself damaged, we can look in volatile memory, RAM. Page file and swap file used for running applications when RAM is exhausted may contain information. The operating system, was there corruption of data associated with the OS, or can we save from there? If the OS isn't corrupted and we have logs available, the security log, the system log, the application log, we're going to want to gather all that. Then there's the device itself. So when police are taking evidence from laptops, desktops, and mobile devices, they take a complete system image, what we'd call a forensic image. So the original image is kept intact. It's then installed on another computer, it's hashed, and then analyzed to find evidence of any criminal activity. We maintain the original and we work from a copy. So firmware, embedded code, could be reverse engineered by an attacker, so original source code would be compared to the code that was in use at the time of the breach. A coding expert can compare both lots of source code in a technique called regression testing. And rootkits and backdoors are concerned, so they'd be looking for evidence that there's a difference between original code and what was being used at the time of the breach to see if the system was compromised. A snapshot, so if the evidence from a virtual machine, we use a snapshot that we can then export for investigation. Cache, which is special high-speed storage that can be either a reserved section of main memory or an independent high-speed storage device. So memory and cache are both volatile, and we'll talk about volatility here in just a moment. The network. So the OS includes command line tools like netstat that provide information that could disappear if you reboot the computer. So, like RAM, network connections are volatile and they're lost on reboot, or even with the passage of time. When referring to evidence, you may hear the word artifacts, which can refer to any piece of evidence, including log files, registry hives, DNA, fingerprints, or fibers of clothing, invisible to the naked eye. Really, just about any piece of evidence. So when we're thinking about digital forensics and an attack, if there were physical aspects to this attack that we could catch on video, then CCTV could be a good source of evidence for helping to identify attackers and the time the attack was launched. So when the crime involves an attacker breaching our facilities, for example, that can be vital in apprehending suspects and reconstructing the timeline of events. So the timelines, the sequence of events, will be very important. So timestamps. Each file has timestamps showing when the files were created, last modified, last accessed. We need to think about the time offset, where evidence is collected across multiple time zones. You have to record the offset based on time zone. So for example, reading the time offset, if it looks like it started in Chicago, but then we apply normalization when it's 4 a.m. in London, the time in Chicago is 10 p.m. So in the digital forensics process, investigators may also use tags, what we call e-discovery tags. They're virtual sticky notes or labels attached to documents, making them easier to search and find. These can be helpful in keeping the legal team organized as they're building a defensible case. So I talked about volatility just a moment ago. So I want to talk to you about volatility and the order of volatility, because to determine what happened on a system, you need a copy of the data. But what evidence should you collect first? Well, if it disappears on system reboot, power loss, or through the passage of time, it is considered volatile. So if we were to quantify that volatility in approximate order from most to least, CPU cache and registers are very volatile, where data stored in an archival media or backup is not at all volatile. And going down the list from most to least, we have routing tables and ARP caches, which are going to time out and disappear, live network connections that are going to be gone with a reboot, RAM gone with a reboot, temporary file system and swap or page files, which can be around across reboots for sure, but are definitely temporary in nature. But as we get to the bottom of the list, data on a hard disk, remotely logged data, data in an archive is going to be not at all volatile. For the exam, remember this: the volatile data, the data that is perishable, should be collected first. Which brings us to the topic of evidence preservation. Evidence needs to be preserved in its original state so it can be produced as evidence in court. That is to say, original data must remain unaltered and pristine. And that's where a forensic copy of evidence can come in handy. So what is a forensic copy exactly? It's an exact sector-by-sector copy of a hard disk or other storage device taken using specialized software which preserves an exact copy of the original disk. So deleted files, slack space, system files, executables, documents renamed to mimic system files and executables are all part of a forensic image. Putting a copy of the most vital evidence on a worm drive will prevent any tampering with the evidence because you can't delete data from a worm drive. WORM stands for Write Once, Read Many. You could also write, protect, or put a legal hold on some types of cloud storage, making that storage immutable, unwritable, unchangeable, essentially locking that storage after we place our evidence there. And to preserve original evidence, investigators will work with that forensic copy, leaving the original to remain unaltered and pristine. So when we think of that chain of custody, evidence storage also comes into play. So just thinking about the concerns for evidence storage, we want to know how to retain logs, drive images, VM snapshots, and other data sets for recovery and internal or forensic investigations. So protections for storage may include lock cabinets or safes, dedicated or isolated storage facilities, offline storage or immutable storage that we talked about a moment ago, making sure that where this storage is maintained is access restricted and we track any activity in or out of that facility. Hash management and encryption, also important. Remember, if we take a hash of an image, we can take another hash of that image later, and if the two do not match, we know that the integrity of that data has been compromised. Let's move on to e-discovery. E-discovery, also called electronic discovery, is the process of identifying, preserving, collecting, processing, reviewing, and producing electronically stored information in litigation. The digital forensics process involves identifying, preserving, collecting, recovering, analyzing, and reporting on digital information. And in fact, in a cloud scenario during e-discovery, cloud service providers, the CSP, may be subpoenaed to allow collection, review, and interpretation of electronic documents and data. So what exactly is the difference between digital forensics and e-discovery? Well, computer forensics involves the use of a forensic expert to protect data integrity and to copy, capture, recover the data that's stored on a device. E-discovery firms typically do not analyze the data they collect. Forensic investigators, on the other hand, have specialized training enabling them to analyze data, protect data integrity, and to recover missing or deleted data. So e-discovery is about gathering the data. So let's talk about data recovery, because sometimes bad actors will try to cover their tracks by deleting data. And that's where forensic data recovery comes into play. It's a process used to retrieve data that will be used for legal purposes. Investigators have to work with information in a way that will not change or compromise the original source. They can use a variety of techniques to fill in missing pieces or to make information meaningful. For example, restoring a damaged or deleted partition, looking for traces of information which could reveal how and when the partition was used. And these special skills could be critical when working with computers seeded with safety measures to prevent legal investigations. It's going to require special procedures to recover. So e-discovery works in conjunction with digital forensics. Their functions are complementary. So a key difference here is forensic data recovery requires specialized training and knowledge, where it's less true with e-discovery. For example, some of the security tooling around Office 365 makes it possible for a layperson to perform searches based on litigation request and to mark that information as part of a legal hold. But forensic requires specialized talent. So let's talk about reporting. So after analyzing all the relevant evidence, digital forensic experts create a report documenting their findings. So what's typically in the report? There is no set format, but they often document the tactics, techniques, and procedures used in an attack. And there are a few common elements in the typical report: an executive summary of findings and recommendations, a list of forensic tools used in the investigation, and if you use tools that are not suited to the task, that will come up in court. That will be challenged by the other team's lawyers. A list of evidence collected and analyzed, findings derived from the evidence analysis, and recommendations based on the findings. All right, my friends, that brings us to the end of 4.8. I hope you're getting value from the series. If you have any questions, as always, leave them in the comments below the video. Reach out directly on LinkedIn. Happy to help where I can. I'll look forward to seeing you back here in the next day or so for section 4.9. And until next time, take care and stay safe.